This is a dilapidated, rusting excavator in an abandoned mine. Its ultimate fate was supposed to be discarded like a pile of scrap iron and rot completely. But right from the first glance, you decided to exhaust all your energy reserves to force this discarded relic of the old era to transform into a war fortress. All simply because you had awakened the universal mechanization system, merely needing to consume mental energy to enlighten any inorganic or semi-organic object into a mechanical creation. Even the creations you enlightened could merge into Titan monsters. Right as the rainstorm poured down, you were kicked out from the back seat of an off-road vehicle into a muddy puddle in the desolate Forbidden Zone, no different from a dead dog. The broken leg landed first, and an excruciating pain immediately exploded from deep within the wound. The pain made your vision go dark, but before you could even regain your senses, a mud-covered military boot stepped heavily on your neck. Tambiasi, don't be in a hurry to die. A disgusting, mocking voice rang out from above your head. It was Scarface, the leader of the mercenaries for the Tycoon family. Right after that, he grabbed your hair, forcing you to look up, and, at the same time, a 3D holographic screen suddenly appeared in the midst of the rainstorm. In the image was the rooftop of a high-rise building. It was Luke Drake, and your younger sister, Tam Zhao, in a faded old dress. With just one glance, your pupils shrank like pinheads. Luke Drake was step by step forcing your sister to the edge of the rooftop, as if playing with a dying mouse. He laughed in a sick and cruel manner. Jump. Doesn't your brother love you the most? Jump down from here, and I will consider sparing your life. Tam Zhao's voice was trembling from being tormented. You promised me that if my brother took the blame for you, you would give me the money for medicine, and would take good care of him. But Luke Drake completely stopped bothering to pretend anymore. Right in front of you, he laughed mockingly, tearing away all layers of disguise, saying that the medicine money was just a trick to deceive her. He said every day he sent people to visit her, forcing her to kneel down, forcing her to bark like a dog. He said that the lowly scum living in the outer ring, like you were inherently born to entertain them. Every word, every sentence, was like a knife stabbing into your heart. Only now did you know that taking the blame for Luke Drake and going to prison not only harmed yourself, but also meant you push your sister into hell with your own hands. Then, on the screen, Tam Zhao looked through the lens as if she had seen you. She smiled a desolate smile, her eyes lacking any vitality, leaving only the exhaustion of being completely crushed. Brother, I'm sorry I couldn't wait for you anymore. Zhao is so dirty now, so tired now. The next second, she spread her arms wide, like a butterfly with broken wings, throwing herself from the hundreds of meters high building. The image suddenly went black, but your world also completely collapsed at that moment. No, you struggled frantically in the mud, all 10 fingers scraping into the slushy mud, your knuckles turning pale. Fresh blood oozed out and mixed with the muddy water, but the broken leg made it impossible for you to even stand up. You could only be like a wild dog nailed to the ground, screaming hoarsely from your throat, gritting your teeth and spitting out a vicious oath. Luke Drake, the Luke family, Tams, even if I turn into a devil, I will definitely make you pay the most tragic price. Scarface just laughed. After laughing enough, he casually retracted the projection, then kicked you down once again. Just slowly wait for death. The pets in the Forbidden Zone will quickly catch the scent and come looking for you. After saying that, he led his henchmen into the vehicle and arrogantly left. The off-road vehicle splashed up a large puddle of mud, quickly disappearing towards the high wall. Between heaven and earth, there was only heavy rain left, only a deadly silence left. You lay paralyzed in the cold mud, looking up at the gray sky, only feeling as if your chest had been hollowed out for revenge. You couldn't even stand up, but right at this moment, deep within the ruins, a friction sound that made one's teeth ache rang out softly. Rustle, rustle. You struggled to turn your head. In the darkness, 3 pairs of green eyes lit up one after another. Mutant hyenas, the bottom-tier predators of the Forbidden Zone. They love nothing more than prowling around heavily injured prey, watching the prey gradually lose its vitality and fear, and then rushing up to deliver the finishing blow. They closed in step by step, foul-smelling drool dripping into the mud, the strong stench from their mouths making one nauseous. Despair, like the tide, slowly submerged you completely. You were not resigned. You still hadn't taken revenge for your sister. But the alpha hyena had lost its patience. It let out a roar, then lunged straight for your neck. Right at the moment its fangs were about to tear open your throat. Your survival instinct was pushed to the absolute limit. Your two hands flailed wildly in the mud, unexpectedly gripping tightly onto a discarded, rusty metal armor plate. And right at this moment, a cold, mechanical voice suddenly rang out in your head. Detected the host's fierce will to survive. Intensity of will to survive. Maximum. Binding conditions met. Universal mechanization ascension. System bound successfully. System? Your consciousness was momentarily blurry, but there was no time to think much. Right after that, a surge of new information flooded into your brain. Novice gift pack distributed. Primary mental energy times 100. Core function activated, Midas touch. The host can consume mental energy to transform inorganic or semi-organic dead matter that they touch into mechanical creations. The very next moment. The hyena's mouth was right in front of your eyes. You had absolutely no time to comprehend. You could only instinctively scream in your head, "Transform! Transform for me!" All your mental energy was poured into the piece of scrap iron in your hand. The piece of iron instantly melted like wax, then quickly restructured in the palm of your hand. Countless tiny gears, connecting rods, and bearings interlocked with each other, accompanied by the crisp click-clack sounds of machinery. In just 1 second, a mechanical spider the size of a palm, entirely pitch black with glowing, fiery red compound eyes, had formed in the palm of your hand. Transformation successful. Creation. Self-destructing mechanical spider. Level, Tier 3. And right at that moment, the tips of the hyena's fangs touched your neck. A vicious glint flashed in your eyes, only having time to issue a command in your head. Go! The mechanical spider immediately sprang up, turning into an afterimage of a black shadow. Before the hyena could close its mouth, it dashed straight into the animal's snout. While the hyena was still bewildered, you squeezed a single word out of your throat. Explode. Boom. A massive explosion rang out, and the head of the alpha hyena was smashed to pieces right in front of you by a destructive blast force. Hot bodily fluids mixed with the pouring rainwater washed over your body. The remaining 2 hyenas were scared out of their minds on the spot, tucking their tails and howling miserably. They turned their heads and ran away into the darkness, while you lay right there, looking at the mangled corpse of the hyena. For a moment, you even stopped breathing for half a beat. The counterkill came too fast and was too cruel. But before you could recover your senses, the system's notification rang out once again. Detected primary biological energy. Tier 1 mutant beast crystal core. Do you want to absorb it? Used for flesh and bone modification. Absorbing to modify the legs. This time, you answered without the slightest hesitation. As soon as the crystal core entered your hand, it immediately turned into a warm stream of energy, frantically rushing towards your legs along your blood vessels. Right after that, a terrifying pain suddenly erupted. That pain was absolutely not something the pain of broken bones could compare to. It felt as if countless nano-level liquid metals were burrowing straight into the wounds on your legs, forcibly regenerating the damaged limbs. The metal and nerves underwent deep connection and fusion amidst high temperature and extreme agony. The damaged structures were dismantled, then replaced with harder materials. Every passing second felt like a century. You were in so much pain that your body convulsed. Blue veins bulged wildly, and your lips were bitten until they bled. Yet from the beginning to the end, you did not open your mouth to cry out even once. You knew this was your only chance. Who knows how long had passed? That hellish modification finally came to an end. You looked down. The original flesh and blood body from the knees down had completely disappeared. In its place was a pair of dark silver mechanical prosthetic legs. Sleek alloy casings, hydraulic structures, biomechanical tendons. Every single detail exuded a cold and brutal sense of technology. Primary mechanical prosthetic leg modification complete. Running foundation and jumping ability increased by 300%, accompanied by primary kinetic energy transmission. You took a deep breath and pushed with your hands to stand up. The next second, you actually stood up once again. The mechanical feet stepped into the puddle, making a heavy and clear sound. Clack! At that moment, you even had the illusion that you had just crawled out of coffin. To test the strength, you suddenly threw a roundhouse kick, kicking towards the half-person high concrete debris block next to you. Boom! The hard concrete block exploded on the spot, with rubble flying in all directions. You looked down at your mechanical legs, your breathing gradually becoming heavy. Strength, speed, stability all far exceeded the human body. However, you quickly calmed down. Relying solely on a pair of legs, you couldn't charge into the high wall, let alone flatten the Luke family. What you wanted was never a lone wolf revenge. What you wanted was firepower, a legion, a mechanical flood that could crush all enemies into dust. And then you slowly raise your head, looking towards the high wall in the distance, the thing that divided this world in two. Inside the wall, the lights were brilliant like the kingdom of gods. Outside the wall, rotting mud, and human lives were as cheap as weeds. Your low voice echoed in the rainy night. Flesh and blood suffer, mechanization ascends, and truth only exists within firing range. Right after that, you turn around and walk towards the massive junkyard nearby, a place piled high with scrap vehicles, industrial waste, broken rebars, and discarded gears. In the eyes of others, that was a metal graveyard. But specifically in your eyes, it was a vast forest of iron and steel. It was your true military arsenal. After you rushed in, you almost madly began to enlighten. Touching a steel bar, enlighten. Pressing your hand on a gearbox, enlighten. Stepping on an old engine, enlighten. Piece by piece of scrap, iron melted in your hands. Restructuring, transforming. Pitch-black mechanical spiders awakened one after another amidst the pile of garbage. They silently crawled onto the roofs of the scrap vehicles, slipped into the gaps of the rebars, and hid beneath the concrete blocks. Their glowing red compound eyes blinked in the night, like will-o'-the-wisps from hell. 1, 5, 20, until the 50th self-destructing mechanical spider was born. Your mental energy was finally drained until not a single drop remained. A splitting headache, ringing ears, and dizziness struck almost all at once. You leaned against a scrap vehicle, your face as pale as a ghost. But when you raised your head and looked around, the entire junkyard was densely packed, covered entirely with red dots, 50 mobile bombs. This was only the beginning. Very soon after, the system popped up a notification again. Detected the number of mechanical creations exceeds 50. Unlocking primary AI module JRVS, unlocking new function, Swarm Mind. Your heart stirred slightly, and you tried issuing a command. Assemble. The next second, the 50 mechanical spiders that were originally scattered everywhere immediately crawled out in unison, quickly gathering into a neat square formation in front of you. You issued another command, hide. They immediately scattered, burrowing back into the darkness, the undersides of the scrap vehicles, the crevices of the garbage piles. All the red lights extinguished at once, as if they had never appeared. Finally, you couldn't hold back and let out a low laugh. With JRVS and the Swarm Mind, these mechanical creations were no longer just individual bombs, but had truly begun to take on the rudimentary form of a legion. However, right at this moment, the roaring sound of off-road vehicle engines unexpectedly echoed from afar. It was Scarface's gang. Unexpectedly, they had returned. Perhaps they wanted to film your tragic state after your corpse was gnawed by mutant beasts to bring back to entertain Luke Drake. However, When they braved the rain to reach the place where they had left you earlier, what they saw was not a mangled corpse, but the corpse of a mutant beast and a chaotic scene everywhere. Those men were stunned on the spot. Scarface also felt that something was wrong, and he roared for everyone to get the hell out of here. Answering them was not a human voice, but a series of heavy metallic footsteps. Clang! You slowly stepped out from the darkness of the garbage pile, standing tall and straight in the rain. The mechanical prosthetic legs reflected a cold silver light under the flashlight beam. Your face was covered in mud, but your gaze was as tranquil as an abyss. Scarface's expression changed instantly. Fear. Shoot. Kill him. Gunfire immediately tore through the curtain of rain. Dense bullets, like an iron rainstorm, poured frantically down onto your body. But the result was even more horrifying than Scarface had imagined. Most of the bullets were easily dodged by you, and the few that hit your mechanical prosthetic legs only sparked a series of flashes. Not even a scratch was left. You didn't stop at all, continuing to move forward. The 5 men opposite finally panicked, and you suddenly stopped at a position about 10 meters away from them. Slowly raising your hand, you snapped your fingers. The sound wasn't loud, but to their ears, it was like the Grim Reaper's hammer coming down. The very next moment, the originally silent garbage piles around, the roofs of the scrap cars, the crevices in the concrete, everything lit up. One red dot, then dozens of red dots. 50 mechanical spiders crawled out simultaneously from all directions, densely packed together, tightly surrounding them in the middle. That suffocating feeling of being encircled by a swarm of steel insects made one's scalp tingle even more than being hunted by mutant beasts. But the signal had long been completely blocked by the mechanical network, leaving only the sizzling sound of static interference. You looked at them as if looking at a few pigs waiting to be slaughtered. Right now, who was the hunter? No one could answer you. So, you reached out your hand and said just one word. Attack. The self-destructing spiders immediately sprang up, darting forward like black arrows. They hugged the thighs, bit the heads, hooked onto the chests, clinging tightly to the bodies of every single mercenary. Those men struggled like madmen, but those metallic claws fundamentally could not be pried off. The next second, boom, a series of explosions erupted simultaneously in the rainy night. Iron shrapnel, equipment fragments, and shock waves were blasted into the sky, then crashed down into the mud together. Waiting for the smoke and fire to clear, the scene was left with only a desolate, scorched patch of earth. But Scarface was still clinging to a dying breath, severely injured all over. He could only lie twitching in the mud. You walked over expressionlessly, picked up the camera from the ground, and pointed the lens at your own rain-drenched face. Squeezing out every word. Luke Drake, wash your neck clean. I'm coming to find you. Finishing your sentence, you turned off the recording. Under the terrified gaze of Scarface, you lifted your mechanical leg. Without a moment's hesitation, you stomped down, completely ending his life. After that, you began to search the corpses. Ammunition, assault rifles, tactical terminals, communication devices. You didn't miss a single useful item. But right when you opened the trunk of the off-road vehicle, your movement paused. Inside, there was a massive iron cage with a black cloth draped over it. Around the iron cage were smeared dark red bloodstains. And from beneath the black cloth came an extremely weak whimpering sound. It sounded like a newborn baby, and also like the sound of a dying small animal. You twisted and broke the front lock, then fiercely yanked the black cloth away. But inside the cage was no human child at all, but a dog bathed in blood. Covered in injuries, its vital signs were incredibly weak. It was clearly about to die. The system immediately notified that it had almost no modification value. But just as you were about to look away, you suddenly saw it. It was biting tightly onto a rag doll in its mouth. The doll was old and ragged, stained with blood, with only one eye left, but it made you recognize it instantly. That was the birthday gift from 3 years ago, bought with the salary you had saved up for half a year to give to your younger sister, Tam Zhao. You still remember the time she hugged the doll, smiling until her eyes shone brightly, saying she wanted to name it Chewbacca, so that it would be like her older brother was always by her side. The memory, like a red-hot iron bar, violently seared into your mind. You couldn't help but reach your hand out, but that dying stray dog suddenly bared its fangs and growled. Even though it couldn't even stand steadily, it still desperately protected that doll. It was protecting the very last trace that Tam Zhao left behind. At that moment, you suddenly no longer felt that it was a dog. You only felt that it was just like you. Both were outcasts abandoned by this world, trampled into a bloody mess, yet still desperately protecting something, refusing to let go. Your hand paused for a moment. Ultimately, you didn't snatch the doll away, but gently stroked its head covered in blood and mud. From today onwards, you don't need to wander anymore. Right after that, you took out all the crystal cores you had found, one from the hyena, plus several retrieved from the mercenaries, a total of 5. The system immediately popped up a warning. Target is too weak. The success rate of biomechanical fusion is less than 10%. Failure will result in complete disintegration, but you still just replied with one word, modify. The next second, the 5 crystal cores melted simultaneously, transforming into a stream of liquid silver, swallowing the entire stray dog. It let out a miserable howl, its broken body forcibly restructured by mechanical power. The damaged spine was perfectly replaced by a metal skeleton. In its originally weak pulse, a cooling fluid filled with nanorobots began to flow. This modification was utterly barbaric and devoid of any mercy, but it managed to endure it, waiting for the blinding silver light to fade. Inside the cage was no longer a dying stray dog, but a wolf whose entire body was covered in dark silver armor. Standing nearly 1 meter tall at the shoulder, with a body length of over 2 meters, a steel werewolf. Enlightenment successful. Creation, mechanical werewolf. Level, Tier 3. Its limbs were hydraulic structures, its claws were cold, sharp alloy, and its electronic eyes burned as red as fire. However, when it stepped in front of you, it only lowered its head, using its cold metal shell to gently rub against your mechanical leg. Right after that, it opened its mouth and spat out the intact doll beside your feet. You picked up the doll, gently wiping away the layer of mud. Then you looked up at the mechanical war wolf, issuing its very first command, attack that vehicle. The next second, it turned into a silver afterimage. The 10-meter distance was almost traversed in a flash. Hearing only a swish sound, that off-road vehicle was actually split in half by it from head to tail as easily as turning over a hand. The cut was as neat as if sliced by a laser beam. Watching this scene, you finally broke into a cold smile. Self-destructing spiders could only launch surprise attacks. A swarm of spiders could surround and kill a small squad. But now, you finally had a heavy-duty unit capable of a frontal breakthrough, tearing apart the enemy's defensive lines. However, things were not over yet. The tactical communication device you had just acquired suddenly transmitted a burst of static noise, and right after that, a gruff voice from the other end of the line rang out, asking why Scarface's side still hadn't replied. He said the Luke family ordered them to bring your corpse back, and the main army of the Black Dragon Gang had arrived at the outer ring of the Forbidden Zone. 3 minutes later, they would launch an indiscriminate blanket firepower attack on the junkyard. The Black Dragon Gang, the dirtiest and most ruthless black gloves of the Luke family in the Forbidden Zone. After hearing this, not only did you not panic, but you even smirked. The nutritional supplements delivered themselves to the door. So you immediately gave an order through Jarvis's swarm mind, telling all the remaining spiders to retreat underground into the garbage piles and under the scrap vehicles, starting to weave a web of traps. Very soon, the ground in the distance began to shake. Dozens of headlight beams tore through the rainy night, and over 30 heavily modified armored vehicles came roaring from all directions, with Black Dragon Head logos spray-painted on their bodies. On the roofs of the vehicles were welded anti-aircraft machine guns, protruding like the fangs of wild beasts. And what was even more troublesome than these armored vehicles were the people who jumped off them. Over 300 heavily armed thugs, all using assault rifles. Every single one of them had a fierce look in their eyes, exuding the murderous aura of outlaws who had navigated the Forbidden Zone. On the roof of the lead vehicle stood a shirtless, one-eyed burly man. His muscles bulged like boulders, and on his shoulder, he carried a horse-chopping saber as big as a door panel. He was the boss of the Black Dragon Gang, One Eye, a Tier 2 strength type Awakened One. He loudly declared, "Whoever can drag out Tam Bac's neck, capture him alive, and bring him back for brutal torture, the bounty will be increased tenfold." The whole gang of thugs immediately acted as if injected with chicken blood, howling and charging into the junkyard. But strangely enough, the deeper they searched, the more they felt something was wrong. It was too quiet. No monsters, no gunfire, no human breath. There was only the sound of rain, along with the completely destroyed off-road vehicle from earlier. Through the optical sensors of the Combat Mechanical Wolf and JRVS, along with its swarm network, the entire junkyard in your eyes was like a real-time, top-down battlefield map. The heat signatures of those 300 people were stepping into the death web you had woven. Report, percentage of targets entering the trap area. Report to Commander, 92% of target units have entered the zone of explosive network. You slowly lowered the unlit cigarette from your lips, but still hadn't lit it, just quietly observing the crowd below, until one thug stepped on a loose piece of iron. He reflexively kicked it aside, revealing the pitch-black mechanical spider underneath. Its bright red compound eyes stared intently at him. Goosebumps covered his entire body. Just as he opened his mouth to scream, right at that moment, you tossed the unlit cigarette from the high tower. Simultaneously, through the swarm network, you issued the most concise and brutal command. Explode. The next second, the center of the junkyard suddenly detonated. Not just one sound, but an entire area, an entire network of explosives activated at once. Boom! The ground seemed to be punched by a heaven-shaking fist, immediately collapsing and trembling. Mud, rebars, shattered car shells, weapon fragments, along with those thugs, were swept up into the air by the shockwave, then rained down in pieces. The thugs who were just howling for your head to claim the bounty didn't even have time to let out a full scream before being swallowed whole in spot. Several armored vehicles were flipped over by the shockwave, their machine gun mounts twisted like fried dough twists, and a fierce fire erupted, illuminating the entire surrounding area into a fiery red. With just this one strike, half of the Black Dragon Gang's 300 men had been blown away. However, the real nightmare had only just begun. Before the smoke and dust from the explosion had fully dissipated, a sharp, metallic wolf howl echoed throughout the junkyard. The Combat Mechanical Wolf made its move. Trailing a silver afterimage, it suddenly dashed out from behind a mountain of garbage and plunged into the chaotic crowd. One thug had just fallen to the ground before receiving a fatal blow. Another turned around trying to run, only to be pounced on and finished off. It was like a high-speed, spinning alloy blade, continuously piercing through the crowd. Slaughtering, harvesting. The bullets hitting its armor could only spark strings of flashes, completely unable to stop it for half a step. And so, the survivors finally collapsed completely. They started throwing away their guns, started crying and screaming, turning around and fleeing desperately, like a herd of prey thrown into a slaughterhouse. But right at this moment, One Eye stepped out. He had relied on the reflexes of a Tier 2, Awakened One to dodge the fatal center the moment the explosion occurred. But he was also thrown back by the shockwave, one arm dripping with fresh blood. But this small injury completely ignited his fury. "Everyone get back from me," he roared, his muscles inflating like balloons, blue veins bulging wildly. His whole body suddenly grew a segment taller, the ground beneath his feet cracking loudly. He charged towards the Combat Mechanical Wolf like an artillery shell, the horse-chopping saber in his hand, tearing through the curtain of rain. Accompanied by an ear-piercing supersonic boom, he slashed down madly. "Shatter for me!" The momentum of that strike even pushed away all the rainwater in front of the blade. However, The combat mechanical wolf did not retreat at all. Its blood-red electronic eyes suddenly flashed. It abruptly raised an alloy claw to meet the attack head-on. The next second, clang, the blade and the claw clashed directly, a deafening screech of metal instantly tearing through the rainy night. Sparks flew in all directions, and a blast of white air centered on the point of impact suddenly expanded outward. The surrounding mud, rubble, and debris were all blown away. One Eye's expression changed immediately because after the strike, not only did he fail to cleave the combat mechanical wolf, but he was also forced back 3 consecutive steps by the terrifying countershock force. His Perlicue instantly cracked, fresh blood flowing down the handle. He looked down. On the blade of his expensive alloy horse-chopping saber, a scratch the size of a grain of rice had actually appeared. But ironically, on the claw of the combat mechanical wolf opposite him, there wasn't even a white scratch. At this moment, One Eye finally felt fear. He was a Tier 2 strength type awakened one. This slash of his could effortlessly slice through solid ice. Yet now, he couldn't even break a wolf's defense. But before he could recover from his shock, the combat mechanical wolf acted. It didn't roar, nor did it pause. Only those blood-red electronic eyes flashed sharply. The next second, the entire wolf transformed into a silver afterimage, vanishing from its spot instantly. Too fast, so fast that One Eye only had time to instinctively raise his saber to block. But ironically, the target of the combat mechanical wolf was absolutely not his chest. Accompanied by a scalp-numbing sound of metal colliding with bone, One Eye let out a miserable scream. He watched helplessly as the terrifying bite force of the combat mechanical wolf rigidly crushed his right arm, holding the saber. Followed by a piercingly tragic scream, One Eye clutched his shattered shoulder, stumbling backward, his entire face completely distorted by agony. What ruthlessness, what arrogance at this moment, all vanished, leaving only the most primal fear. And this step back of his also completely crushed the psychological defense line of the remaining thugs in the Black Dragon gang. The boss is crippled. Run away. This is a monster. This is a devil. The dozens of thugs who were just relying on numbers and guns to charge forward instantly scattered and fled in terror. They didn't even bother picking up their guns, only wanted to run as far away from this slaughterhouse as possible. But ironically, Tam BAC from the very beginning had no intention of letting them escape. The combat mechanical wolf let out a low growl, plunging into the disintegrating crowd. It was like a war meat grinder running at high speed, wherever it passed. The thugs were knocked away and scattered, utterly without the strength to resist. At the same time, at the top of the 100-meter-tall, abandoned scrap tower, you were calmly resting the captured assault rifle, not firing wildly into the crowd. Because under Jovias's marking, who was the heavy weapons operator, who was the ringleader, who was trying to contact reinforcements, you saw it all clearly. And so, continuous gunshots rang out. Bang! A thug trying to climb onto the heavy machine gun mount fell instantly. Bang! Another petty boss hiding behind a car, screaming madly into a communicator, was immediately shot dead, falling stiffly into the mud puddle. The gunshots were not rapid, but every single shot was fatal. Below was the combat mechanical wolf sweeping through frontally, and above was you, like the Grim Reaper, accurately calling the roll for each person. In less than 10 minutes, the 300-strong elite army of the Black Dragon gang had been beaten to a pulp by you, their army annihilated. And the few dozen lucky survivors finally cried and screamed as they rushed towards the exit of the junkyard. But just as they thought they were about to escape, boom, a figure dove straight down from the 100-meter-high tower. It was you. The heavy mechanical parts hit the ground. The muddy earth instantly sank in, and cracks spread out like spider webs in all directions. You slowly stood up, standing expressionlessly in front of them, blocking all their paths of retreat. Since you've come, don't even think about leaving. Your voice was not loud, but falling into their ears, it chilled their spines more than any bullets. Someone reflexively raised their gun, but before they could even pull the trigger, you raise your hand and gently snap your fingers. Click. The next second, the muddy ground beneath the thugs' feet, the overturned cars beside them, the underside of the scrap vehicles, among the scattered parts, suddenly rang out simultaneously with dense mechanical friction sounds. Clack, clack, clack. Right after that, one after another, brand new mechanical spiders crawled out from the darkness and the mud. These were all the soldiers you had secretly created during the battle, thanks to the energy of the crystal cores you had just absorbed. The Black Dragon Gang thugs, who were already running for their lives, seeing this scene, instantly went mad. One screamed, "Devil! You are a devil!" But you couldn't be bothered to explain to the dying, only coldly spitting out 3 words. "It's feeding time." The next moment, the explosions rang out again. Boom, boom, boom. The suicidal explosions were even denser than before. Continuing like rain, the black mechanical tide washed over the crowd, completely submerging the final few dozen survivors. Miserable screams, pleas for life, explosions, all blended into a chaotic symphony. Right after that, everything sank back into a deadly silence. The rain continued to fall. In the entire junkyard, besides you and your mechanical creations, not a single living enemy stood upright. There's still one left. You stepped over the mechanical debris and the corpses littering the ground, slowly walking to the front of One Eye. The boss of the Black Dragon Gang, who had just been screaming to crush your bones inch by inch, was now left with only half a life here, his injuries extremely severe, incredibly pathetic. His whole body was like a rotting worm, dragging himself inch by inch forward in the mud. He heard the footsteps, his entire body stiffening. Don't kill me." His voice trembled so much it was incoherent. It was Luke Trake. It was all Luke Trake's orders. "Whatever you want to know, I will tell you everything. I beg you to spare my life." But ironically, looking at him, you only remembered the humiliation of having both your legs broken, remembering the despair when your sister threw herself from the high-rise building. Pity? That had died along with Tam Zhao long ago. So, you slowly lifted your right mechanical leg, then stomped down hard. Crack, accompanied by a heavy collision sound, as decisive as stepping on a dry branch. One eye convulsed all over, and the light in his remaining single eye completely extinguished. After that, you began to clean up the battlefield. Weapons, ammunition, components, armor pieces, crystal cores, everything usable. You didn't miss a single item, especially the biological crystal cores scattered on the battlefield, which you picked up and absorbed one by one. 1, 2, 10. Eventually, a total of 27 Tier 1 crystal cores were swallowed by you. The energy bar on the system panel surged. Reserve energy, 78%. Warning, reserve energy is nearing overload. Please consume or upgrade as soon as possible. But ironically, right at this moment, the mud-covered tactical communicator on One Eye's waist suddenly vibrated violently. The screen lit up, showing only one name: Young Master Luke Trake. Your actions paused for a moment. Right after that, you slowly picked up the communicator, the corners of your mouth lifting bit by bit, into a cold, ruthless, and almost pathologically cunning smile. You stare at the answer button. Inside the high walls, the Luke family manor. The domed ceiling was brightly lit, crystal chandeliers refracting magnificent beams of light. The scent of champagne, perfume, and expensive food blended together. The entire banquet hall exuded a luxurious aura, completely isolated from the wasteland. As for Luke Trake, he was sitting on the main sofa, wearing a custom-tailored white suit. In his arms, he held an exquisitely made-up woman. His expression was lazy, as if he had just sent someone to dispose of a bug. The woman coquettishly asked him, "Has the bug in the forbidden zone been cleaned up yet?" Luke Trake held his wine glass, sneering dismissively. "Just a country bumpkin. I already had One Eye lead 300 men over there. By now, his bones have probably been gnawed clean by wild beasts." Right at that moment, his personal communicator vibrated. It was One Eye's private line. Luke Trake didn't even look, answering immediately, his tone still mocking. "One Eye, Did you finish recording the video? Remember, the camera angles need to be beautiful. I want to clearly see the despairing, begging face of that piece of trash. However, from the other end of the line, it wasn't One Eye's sycophantic laughter. There was only the buzzing sound of electric current, and after a moment of deadly silence, a low, hoarse voice, like metal grating against each other, slowly echoed out. "Is that champagne tasty?" With just one sentence, Luke Trake's entire body instantly went rigid. His hand trembled, and the wine glass fell straight onto the marble floor. Shattering into pieces, the music and laughter in the entire banquet hall also came to an abrupt halt. Everyone looked over in astonishment, but an even more horrifying thing was yet to come. The communication device was forced into hologram projection mode, and a screen of light unfolded right in the middle of the banquet hall. In the image was not Tam Bac's corpse, but a hellish battlefield with overturned, burning armored vehicles. Desolation everywhere, the Black Dragon Gang's Black Dragon emblem completely covered by smoke, dust, and mud. And in the middle of that battlefield, a mechanical war wolf over 2 meters long. Its entire body covered in dark silver armor stood tall and imposing, its foot stepping on the torn flag of the Black Dragon Gang. When its blood-red electronic eyes swept across the projection, the entire banquet hall felt as if someone had choked their throats. The ladies and misses immediately screamed and backed away. As for Luke Trake, his legs went limp and he slumped to the ground. Right after that, the camera lens slowly moved upward. The person appearing in the projection was your face, covered in mud and rainwater, yet emotionless to the point of being chilling. What was even more terrifying was that you were standing, surviving tall amidst that azure-like scene. The projection panned downward again. One Eye's massive body lay flat at your feet like a pile of slushy mud, severely injured all over. Incredibly pathetic, with only his single eye darting back and forth in fear. He struggled to squeeze out a broken sentence. "Young Master Luke. Save," but the word save wasn't even fully spoken. You had already lifted your mechanical right leg. "Don't!" Luke Trake screamed hysterically in the banquet hall, his voice cracking. However, the next second, the foot in the projection still stomped down. One Eye's miserable howling was cut short, completely silenced. The banquet hall was as dead silent as paper, everyone's faces as pale as sheets. Some people started shivering, some covered their mouths, wanting to vomit. As for Luke Trake, he was so terrified he wet his pants, his whole body turning to jelly on the floor, unable to articulate even a complete sentence. At this time, you pointed the camera back at yourself, looking straight at Luke Trake through the projection. In your eyes, there was no madness, no roaring, only a terrifyingly chilling calmness. "Wash your neck clean," you squeeze out word by word. "In 3 days, I will come knocking." Finishing your words, you didn't give Luke Trake any chance to reply. The 5 fingers tightened, and the military communicator was instantly crushed into a pile of scrap iron by you. The projection abruptly died out. In the Luke family's banquet room, there was only a floor full of shattered glass and a crowd of aristocrats drained of color, along with a wealthy young master who had been completely paralyzed by fear. At the junkyard, the rain was still washing over the fragments of the communicator. I slowly raised my head, looking towards the high wall in the distance. But I knew very well that with my current meager strength, I was far from being able to break down that door. I could crush the Black Dragon Gang, but to truly charge inside the high walls and trample the Luke family, I was still too far off. I need stronger firepower. I need something that can truly besiege a city and break defenses. Therefore, I immediately opened the Forbidden Zone map that I had decrypted from One Eye's communicator. Every stronghold, warehouse, and resource point of the Black Dragon Gang was marked, and my eyes finally locked onto the deepest area marked in red with a skull, the abandoned mine. The note was very short, but enough to catch the eye. Warning, this area has high-intensity energy reactions. Suspected sleeping giant. Do not approach. I looked at that line of text and chuckled again. A giant? Just in time. When the rain stopped, the sky was not yet bright. In the system, a countdown clock had already started ticking. Time until knocking on the door. 71 hours and 58 minutes left. Time was too tight, and the firepower was far from enough. I'll let the mechanical war wolf and the spider swarm clean up the battlefield first, dismantling armor, transporting metal, collecting weapons, and absorbing energy. But even so, the amount of metal and energy reserves displayed on the system's control panel was still not enough for me to truly shake a tycoon family in the inner city. Therefore, without hesitating any longer, I immediately jumped onto the mechanical war wolf's back, leading the spider swarm that had expanded to over 200, following the map straight towards the abandoned mine. 100 kilometers away, the abandoned mine looked like an industrial graveyard forgotten by the world. A massive open-pit mine, collapsed factory buildings, rusted conveyor belts, scrap mine carts. Everywhere was cold metal and heavy scrap. But this place was not quiet at all. I had just entered the mine when a terrifying Tier 2 mutated heavy-armored lizard, as big as a rhinoceros, covered in bone spikes, charged out from the ruins. However, it charged fast, but died even faster. The mechanical war wolf didn't even need to use its claws. It just swung its head hard the moment it brushed past it, the wolf's head acting like a siege hammer smashing into its side. The sound of bones breaking was terrifyingly crisp, and the lizard's massive body flew horizontally over 10 meters, smashing half a wall before crashing heavily to the ground. Dead, a one-hit kill. Right after that, the remaining Tier 2 mutant beasts in the mine were also quickly cleared out. This industrial ruin site logically became my new stronghold. I immediately ordered JRVS to scan the entire mine, searching for the source of the highest density metal reaction. Very quickly, the result came out. 120 meters below the main mine pit, there was a massive metal target. And so, the more than 200 mechanical spiders instantly turned into combat engineers, crawling along the pit walls, frantically digging into the mud, rubble, and scrap, or were continuously thrown up. Half an hour later, a section of caterpillar track thicker than an adult's waist finally emerged from the bottom of the pit. Digging continued, and another half hour passed. A true metallic monster finally lay completely before you. It was a massive mining excavator left over from the old era. Its entire body was over 20 meters long, the caterpillar tracks taller than a person. The vehicle body was clad in thick armor, the crane arm and giant bucket looking like the contracted skeleton of an ancient beast. Although mottled with rust, it still exuded an industrial aura of oppression that was both wild and violent. You almost recognized immediately that once this thing was enlightened, it would absolutely become a veritable war fortress. And so, you immediately jumped down into the mine pit, placing your hand on the steel plate. JRVS, take this excavator as the core, proceed with biomechanical fusion. However, the very next second, the system poured cold water on you. Target mass and volume severely exceed limits. The energy required for enlightenment is 37 times the current reserve amount. Fusion progress, 0.1% stalled. Energy not just insufficient but severely lacking. You stood before the sleeping steel monster, silent for a few seconds, then immediately made a decisive choice. If scavenging scrap wasn't enough, then go big. So, you had JRVS scan for the strongest biological energy source within a 10 kilometers radius of the mine. Very quickly, a large canyon in the north of the map was marked in red, the warning level raised to the maximum. Tier 3 mutant creature nest, corrosive venomous sting wasps. Danger, tens of thousands of mutant venomous wasps, at least one Tier 3 wasp queen. You stared intently at that area. Your eyes were cold and grim. Danger? That's right. Wealth is found in peril. And so, while using the available metal scrap in the mine to continue producing troops, you also conveniently upgraded the mechanical spider swarm. From simple self-destructing units, you stuffed them with more complex firepower modules. As for the mechanical war wolf, It was also armed to the teeth by you with heavy machine guns and armor plates stripped from the Black Dragon gang. Until the horizon finally brightened, the mechanical legion at your feet had expanded once again. 350 spiders, one mechanical war wolf armed to the teeth. However, when you looked at this army, you still only felt one thing. Not enough, still far from enough. But time waited for no one. You didn't hesitate any longer, jumped onto the wolf's back. Heading straight north, 10 minutes later you reached the canyon, but before you could even get close, a nauseating rotten stench assaulted your face. The entire canyon was so quiet it didn't look like a nest of living creatures, but more like a giant graveyard. You raise your hand to signal the Legion to stop, and right at this moment, a series of wing-flapping sounds, so dense they threatened to pierce your eardrums, rang out. A sudden fierce wind howled and swept from the depths of the canyon. You abruptly looked up. The sky went dark. That wasn't a dark cloud at all, but tens of thousands of giant mutant wasps the size of a wash basin, forming a pitch-black storm, trailing dark green venomous stingers. They crashed down like a tsunami. The next second, countless green venomous drops tore through the air and flew toward you. Like an acid rain pouring down everywhere, the ground and rocks hissed and smoked the moment a drop of venom touched them, being corroded. If it were any other flesh and blood army facing this, they would definitely be melted down to nothing but bones. But ironically, what you brought was never a flesh and blood army. You didn't even bother looking up, only issuing an order through the swarm consciousness, anti-air formation. The next second, the 150 mechanical spiders immediately linked tail to tail, forming an interlocking steel tortoise-shell formation on the ground. Right after that, the back armor of each spider slid open, revealing not sharp spikes, but sophisticated mini 6-barrel grenade launchers. Fia, bang, 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 bang. In an instant, it seemed as if countless guns fired simultaneously. 350 firepower units fired over 2,000 mini explosive grenades into the sky in mere fractions of a second. A massive web of death formed by fire, shrapnel, and shockwaves immediately spread out in midair. Boom, boom, boom. The sky was instantly lit up by explosions. The diving, corrosive, venomous wasps seemed to crash into an invisible iron wall, swarms of them vanishing into midair. Green fluids and charred black wasp corpses rained down sparsely. With just one volley, the sky-covering black wasp swarm was torn open with a huge hole. And you absolutely did not give them a chance to regroup. The mechanical war wolf let out a roar, carrying you on its back, ignoring the acid rain filling the ground. Charging straight into the canyon, it knocked away the giant boulder blocking the nest entrance, forcibly breaking in. The inside of the nest was even more disgusting than the outside, a foul, sour stench. Translucent wasp eggs and squirming larvae covering the ground made the entire underground cave look like a giant rotting womb. But strangely, when you looked at this place, what you thought of wasn't disgust, but crystal cores. Kill them all. You only said 3 words. Right after that, 50 specially marked mechanical spiders immediately dashed into the densest areas and directly self-destructed. Boom, 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 boom. The entire underground wasp nest instantly turned into a sea of fire. Wasp eggs, larvae, worker wasps, all turned to ash in the terrifying heat of the explosions. Stalactites and rubble fell profusely from the cave roof. However, a tremor of this magnitude finally awakened the true ruler in the deepest part of the nest. Screech, accompanied by an ear-piercing shriek that almost pierced the brain, a giant wasp queen, the size of a small truck, suddenly shattered the rock wall and rushed out. Its abdomen was bloated, a highly toxic dark green color, and its 2 pairs of membranous wings vibrated at high speed. Corrosive slime continuously dripped from its mouth. Just its aura alone was much more dangerous than all the previous monsters. A Tier 3 wasp queen. Moreover, a Tier 3 wasp queen that was completely maddened. It locked onto you the moment it saw you. Almost without pausing, it immediately turned into a green afterimage and charged towards you. But ironically, you still didn't retreat a step. The combat mechanical wolf struck first at this moment. It leaped high into the air, biting tightly onto one of the monster's vibrating membranous wings, tearing off an entire wing covered in sticky flesh and blood. The Wasp Queen shrieked miserably. Its massive body crashed heavily to the ground, and in the moment it rolled, you had already raised your gun, aiming straight at its giant compound eye, and emptied an entire magazine. Armor-piercing bullets shot through its eyeball, green bodily fluids splashing everywhere. The intense pain and blindness made the Wasp Queen go completely insane. Disregarding everything, it flapped its remaining wing staggeringly, charging toward you to execute a fatal ramming attack. But ironically, you merely calmly lifted your mechanical right leg, delivering a heaven-shaking kick to its head. Thud! That feeling was like a sledgehammer smashing a ripe fruit. The Wasp Queen's head suffered a devastating blow, green fluid splattering all over the ground. Its massive body stumbled forward 2 more steps before collapsing heavily to the floor. The battle was over. You walked over, skillfully slicing open its shattered head. From inside, you dug out a crystal core the size of a fist, entirely jade green. This was a Tier 3 crystal core with swirling lightning inside. Detected high-purity Tier 3 biological crystal core. Convertible energy, 12,000 units. Plus the Tier 1 and Tier 2 crystal cores scattered everywhere outside. It was enough. Half an hour later, carrying an energy reserve nearing overload, you returned to the bottom of the main pit of the abandoned mine. Standing before that massive excavator, this time you placed your hand on it again. The energy was sufficient. Detected old-world heavy engineering machinery, suitable for War Fortress. Transformation protocol, supreme restructuring. Initiated. The next second, a blue beam of light shot straight into the sky. This wasn't a standard modification, but a complete crushing and recreation. Tracks detached, armor plates were dismantled, the crane arm and bucket disintegrated mid-air into countless components. The entire excavator was as if kneaded by an invisible hand in a storm of steel, countless metal components melting in the data stream, expanding, compressing, then reassembling in an unimaginable way. More than 10 seconds later, the storm abruptly stopped. In the original spot, there was no longer a mining excavator, but instead, a 10-meter-tall humanoid combat mecha, its entire body covered in heavy armor. It possessed no superfluous decorative details, only the purest lines of violence. Its left arm was an integrated high-frequency, vibrating chainsaw sword. Its right arm was a double-barreled heavy cannon. Mounted on both shoulders were 2 honeycomb-style micro-missile launchers. Tier 1 War Fortress, Fury. Data online. Without any hesitation, you jumped straight into the cockpit that opened up at the chest. The moment the hatch closed, countless neural connection sensors pressed against the back of your neck, initiating 100% neural synchronization. Synchronization complete. Fury reporting. Welcome, pilot. Commander. At that moment, you felt you were no longer sitting in a cockpit, but your entire being had become one with this steel giant. The mecha's sensors became your hands and eyes. The tremors of the earth, the flow of the air, the outlines of the ruins in the distance. Everything became unprecedentedly clear. And so, only 2 words popped into your head. Start up. OM on the mecha's giant metal head. A single blood-red electronic eye suddenly lit up. You tried taking a step. Boom. The moment the giant foot landed, the earth shook violently, and even the hard rock cracked into spiderweb-like fissures. Just walking alone possessed destructive power equivalent to conventional weapons. After that, you raise your left arm, the chainsaw sword activated, and an ear-piercing grinding sound immediately echoed throughout the mine. You casually swung a horizontal slash toward a rocky hill over 10 meters high nearby. The next second, the upper half of that hill, along a perfectly smooth cut, slowly slid down, crashing heavily to the ground, the cut as flat as a mirror. Right after that, you aimed the double-barreled cannon on your right arm at the main building of the abandoned mine over a kilometer away. Fire bang. Two armor-piercing explosive shells tore through the sky. The next second, the entire main building seemed to be struck by a giant fist, exploding in half on the spot. The obsession with insufficient firepower that had haunted your heart was finally truly appeased for the first time. You reached out and gently stroked the icy control stick, whispering, "This is what you call a door-knocking greeting." But ironically, the system's cold countdown clock was still reminding you how pressing reality was. Time until knocking on the door, 47 hours and 32 minutes left. You knew very well that Fury was a trump card for breaching. But having just a trump card was not enough. You needed more cannon fodder, more firepower, more mechanized units to spread across the battle lines. So, your gaze quickly shifted to the kilometers-long abandoned conveyor belts in the mine. And an assembly line, a new plan for massive troop production, quickly formed in your mind. However, the very moment you were preparing to order the construction of the next production line, an ear-piercing alarm sounded abruptly and blared loudly in the cockpit without warning. Your pupils contracted, and you quickly looked at the radar scanning interface. You saw that on the screen, those unknown light dots originally colored yellow were rushing toward the mine at high speed from all directions. And after JRVAS completed the identification, those patches of light dots in just a few short seconds all turned blood red, indicating the highest level of hostility densely packed together. The signal covered the entire radar. Warning, detected a large number of standard armed units approaching. Quantity identification result, approximately 1 reinforced battalion, the High Wall Garrison, 7th Mobile Regiment. Just as you tested Fury's firepower and were about to continue mass-producing troops, the alarm in the cockpit suddenly wailed. On the holographic radar, dense red dots were encircling from all directions, just like a giant blood web slowly tightening. The target was singular, and it was you in the center of the mine. Detected large-scale, standard formation armed units. Quantity, 1,124. Identification result, High Wall Garrison, 7th Mobile Regiment. Estimated time of contact, 11 hours, 45 minutes, 12 seconds. A fully equipped mobile regiment, complete with tanks, armored vehicles, and self-propelled artillery. A scale of this magnitude in the wasteland was enough to flatten a small city. But looking at those red dots, you didn't panic at all. Instead, you calmly uttered a sentence. You didn't panic, but walked straight to the rusted, abandoned or refinery deep inside the mine. You understood very well, a crisis was never a bad thing. To others, this was a death warrant, but to you, it was the perfect production plan. Bang! After kicking away the rusted alloy door, you stepped into the old-era factory that had been silent for many years. Giant stamping presses, smelting furnaces, conveyor belts, robotic arms, all covered in dust. They were the corpses left behind by industrial civilization. But in your eyes, they weren't junk, but the skeletal framework of an arsenal. You walked up to the central control console, placing your right hand on it without hesitation. JRVS, initiate subprogram pairing. I want to take over everything here. The next second, a blue data stream frantically surged from the console into the entire factory. The machines that had been silent for decades suddenly seemed to be breathed with life. 3 abandoned production lines lit up simultaneously. Old conveyor belts were reinforced. Stamping presses changed molds at high speed. The giant smelting furnace spewed red fire again, the temperature skyrocketing to the limit in the blink of an eye. Detected 3 modifiable production lines. Consuming energy, 5,000. Automated arsenal transformation protocol initiated. Right after that, you used the swarm mine to issue an order to all mechanized units. Bring all dismantleable metal in the mine. Throw it all into smelting furnace number 1. The moment the order was issued, The entire mine seemed to come alive. Over 300 mechanical spiders and the mechanical warwolf immediately dispersed, turning into the most highly efficient demolition team. Or trucks, steel beams, conveyor belt supports, scrap pipelines, the factory framework that had collapsed by half. All were brutally dismantled by them. Then thrown piece by piece into the smelting furnace, the fire soaring to the sky. Molten steel surged. Right after that, a true industrial slaughter commenced. The red-hot molten steel flowed into the molds, pounded into spider shells by the stamping presses, high-speed robotic welding arms moving along the conveyor belt, assembling, implanting cores. At the end of the production line, brand-new mechanical spiders hit the ground one by one. Their 6 bright red electronic eyes lit up simultaneously. Then they nimbly jumped down, merging into the increasingly massive mechanical insect swarm below. The unit count began to jump wildly. 350, 500, 1,200. In just 3 hours, you were no longer creating soldiers. You were printing soldiers. But you still found it too slow. So, you immediately activated the more complex second production line, changing the target to standard Warwolf components. The new mechanical wolves began to be mass-assembled. Exoskeletons, small-caliber shoulder cannons, reinforced hydraulic structures, item by item, was added. The already ferocious mechanical wolves truly began to evolve toward heavy assault beasts. By the time dawn approached, the inside and outside of the mine had completely changed. At the center of the mine, it was no longer an empty industrial ruin, but over 3,000 cold mechanical units standing tall. Among them, 300 newly enhanced mechanical wolves, acting like the Royal Guard, surrounded the creator. As for the outer ring area of the mine, within a 5 kilometers radius, you had long ago buried it full of mechanical spiders. In the eyes of others, it was the wilderness, but specifically in your eyes, it was already an entire minefield of death. At that moment, you finally felt a sliver of long-lost security. 10 hours later, as dawn was breaking, the 7th Mobile Regiment finally arrived. Hundreds of combat vehicles kicked up blinding dust, surging over from the horizon. Tanks, armored vehicles, self-propelled artillery lined up in a horizontal formation. The torrent of steel charged aggressively, looking as if it wanted to crush the entire mine. And in the command vehicle, the supreme commander of the 7th Mobile Regiment, Major Raymond, held binoculars. His face exuded the arrogance typical of a high-wall officer. In his eyes, you were nothing but a lowly scum hiding in a garbage pile in the Forbidden Zone. Being able to wipe out the Black Dragon gang yesterday was just dumb luck. Today, facing the regular army, you wouldn't even have the right to struggle. So he just glanced at the mine once, then sneered and ordered, "All artillery units, 3 rounds of indiscriminate blanket fire. I want this mine, along with any traces left by that piece of trash named TAM BAC, completely wiped off the map." The next second, 20 main battle tanks and 2,155 millimeters self-propelled howitzers simultaneously raised their barrels. Boom, 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 boom. The earth immediately roared. Tons of steel and fire were hurled into the sky, transforming into countless orange-red streaks of light pouring down onto the mine. The first wave of artillery bombardment lasted a full 10 minutes, the fire turning half the sky red. Mushroom clouds billowed into the air, and the entire mountain looked as if a layer had been sliced off. In the command vehicle, Raymond even leisurely picked up a cup of coffee. In his view, with this level of blanket firepower, let alone a person, not even a fragment of a building could survive. However, after the smoke and fire cleared, the scene that emerged left the entire 7th Mobile Regiment dead silent. The refinery, the center of the mine, remained completely unscathed. A giant, pale blue energy shield, like an inverted bowl, firmly enveloped the factory area. The artillery barrage that was enough to flatten a mountain just now. When it landed on the shield, it only caused insignificant ripples. Raymond's expression changed instantly. An energy shield? This strategic-level defensive weapon was supposed to only appear in the crucial architectural complexes of the tycoons in the inner city. How could the dogs of the Luke family have this kind of capability? Doesn't even tickle. These words were like a slap directly in the face of everyone in the 7th Mobile Regiment. Raymond was furious on the spot, waving his command saber. He roared at the top of his lungs, "Tank Company, charge with all your might. Crush that turtle shell for me. Crush it." Finishing his words, 20 main battle tanks roared and charged out, closely followed by over 1,000 infantrymen. The entire Mobile Regiment acted like a steel spear, thrusting straight into the front of the mine. But ironically, they hadn't even charged 500 meters before the lead tank ran into trouble. Its tracks ran over an inconspicuous iron plate. Right after that, 3 mechanical spiders unexpectedly sprang up from the ground, instantly clinging to the connection points between the chassis and the steel tracks. Before the driver in the cockpit could even react, an explosion rang out. Boom! The 60-ton main battle tank was blown into the air, its undercarriage pierced by the blast. The steel tracks and road wheels were blown to pieces. And that was only the beginning. The next second, across the entire path of advance, thousands of bright red dots lit up simultaneously. From underground, beneath the scrap iron, among the gravel piles, underneath the bomb craters, countless mechanical spiders crawled out in unison, like a swarm of venomous steel insects emerging from hell, charging toward the tanks, armored vehicles, and soldiers. Boom, 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 boom. The dense explosion sounds immediately connected into one continuous roar. Before the torrent of steel could even touch the shield, its spine was broken by the pre-laid minefield. Tanks were flipped over, armored vehicles were blown apart, and the infantry rolled around in the sea of fire and shockwaves. The vanguard troops were almost blown to hell in the blink of an eye. In the command vehicle, Raymond stared fixedly at the surveillance screen, a chill running down his spine. But the real nightmare was yet to come. Just as the Mobile Regiment's formation was blasted to pieces, the war factory that had remained silent in the center of the mine. Its giant alloy gates finally opened slowly. Clack! A heavy footstep echoed from the darkness, followed by another. Right after that, a 10-meter-tall black humanoid mecha stepped out from deep within the factory step by step. Its main armor was dark black, its left arm a chainsaw sword, its right arm a double-barreled cannon. Its single blood-red eye coldly swept across the battlefield, like a true steel demon god stepping out from the depths of the wasteland. That was precisely Fury. And the moment it appeared, it almost made everyone in the 7th Mobile Regiment collectively hold their breath. The tankers were stunned. The infantry fell silent. Even Raymond was momentarily speechless. However, their military instinct forced them to open fire. The remaining dozen or so tanks simultaneously rotated their turrets, aiming all their gun barrels at Fury. Dozens of large-caliber armor-piercing shells wrapped in fire roared, smashing into its chest and shoulder armor. The explosions swallowed the giant figure, but ironically, when the gun smoke cleared, Fury still stood tall there. On its armor plates, there were only a few more faint white scratches. They couldn't even be considered injuries. Inside the cockpit, you looked at the text, "Armor damage, 0.1%, appearing on screen. The corner of your mouth slightly lifted. Startup complete. The next moment, Fury's rear thrusters simultaneously spewed out dark blue flames. The 100-ton steel machine suddenly turned into an afterimage with completely absurd speed, crashing straight into the tank formation. The first Tiger tank had just intended to retreat. The chainsaw sword came crashing down from above, without a hint of hesitation, cleanly slicing off the tank's turret along with half its body, leaving a glowing red cut. Right after that, you delivered another kick. Bam! Another tank next to it was directly flattened into a distorted iron pancake. Smashing tanks, stepping on armored vehicles. This was no longer combat, but a massacre, a complete demolition. In just 10 short seconds, the scarce remaining armored forces were ruthlessly crushed by Fury. Fireball explosions rose continuously. The torrent of steel once viewed as a trump card by the tycoons was now as fragile as paper in front of this mecha. But you still felt it wasn't enough. So, you directly pressed the red button on the central control panel. All forces full assault. The next moment, all the factory's floodgates opened simultaneously. Over 2,000 mechanical spiders and 300 newly modified mechanical warwolves equipped with shoulder cannons, like a black flood released from a dam, surged out of the mine with a roar, pouncing on the infantrymen who had already begun to disband and flee. Cries for mercy instantly drowned the wasteland. The mechanical warwolves precisely attacked the deserters, while the mechanical spiders charged into the formations, diving under armored vehicles, beneath the tracks of self-propelled artillery, and violently self-destructed. In an instant, the battlefield had completely turned into a dead zone. Raymond finally panicked. He desperately urged the command vehicle to turn around, preparing to flee. But ironically, right at this moment, the missile launchers on Fury's shoulders slowly rose. Dozens of red targeting brackets simultaneously locked onto his command vehicle. Death was imminent, and Raymond finally revealed his final trump card. Boom! A terrifying aura suddenly erupted from his body, his military uniform instantly tearing apart. Red runic patterns spread all over his body, his muscles and skeleton expanding madly. His skin rapidly petrified, forming a layer of heavy armor like volcanic magma. A Tier 4 Awakened One, and a magma type at that. The surviving soldiers, seeing this scene, almost simultaneously birthed a final glimmer of hope. To them, a Tier 4 Awakened One was almost a legendary level power. Saying they could withstand artillery shells with their bare bodies was not an exaggeration. As long as Raymond could finish you off in the cockpit, this battle might still be turned around. And so, Raymond looked up at the sky and roared, leaping high into the air. In midair, he forcibly condensed a dark red energy saber 3 meters long, aiming straight at the cockpit of the intruder. Capturing the king first to defeat the bandits. This tactical thought wasn't wrong. But unfortunately, what he faced was not the old-era mechas that still used swords to hack people. In the cockpit, you looked at the red dot marked by the system as Tier 4 organism, magma type, your eyes even carrying a hint of pity. Still using such primitive combat methods? The next second, you slightly raised your hand. Fury's right arm weapon structure, which looked like a double-barreled cannon, instantly transformed, the internal gear system spinning frantically. The gun barrels glowing red. That was never any ordinary heavy cannon, but a dual 6-barrel 30mm rotary cannon. You softly uttered one sentence. Times have changed. Rat-tat-tat-tat-tat. That wasn't the sound of gunfire. That was the roar of a steel hurricane. 2 orange-red whips of fire formed by countless armor-piercing incendiary tracer rounds immediately tore through the sky, whipping straight at Raymond in midair. The first shot shattered his energy shield, the 10th shot pierced his magma armor, the 100th shot completely destroyed all his defenses. After that, there was no need to count anymore. In less than 3 seconds, the Tier 4 Awakened One, who was just acting arrogantly like a god descending to Earth, was torn apart and completely destroyed in midair by the furious firepower. There was no tragic scream, no counterattack. Only dark red energy fragments mixed with equipment debris raining down on the ground. The wind stopped blowing, and the battlefield became quiet. The surviving soldiers stared blankly up at the sky. It wasn't until someone's gun clattered to the ground that the others seemed to have their spines extracted simultaneously. They knelt on the ground one after another. "We surrender. We surrender. Don't kill me. Please. We were wrong. We won't dare do it again. Please," echoed everywhere. But you just looked at them and said one sentence. When an avalanche happens, no snowflake is innocent. Right after that, you ordered the entire army, leave no one alive. And so, the final execution began. Until the first rays of true dawn shone down, the 7th Mobile Regiment had been completely wiped out. Outside the mine, There was only scorched earth, shattered armor, and scattered equipment debris left. Fury stood amidst the battlefield, slowly bent down, and used its giant mechanical hand to carve huge, prominent words onto the ground. Countdown, 1 day. Right after that, you ordered JRVS to forcefully access the 7th Mobile Regiment's communication line, broadcasting this real-time footage straight into the Class A channel of the inner network inside the High Walls. Inside the High Walls, the Luke family council room. The high-ranking members of the Luke family, who were originally casually drinking wine and waiting for news of victory from the front lines. Luke Tien Hung was even comforting Luke Trake, saying that when day broke, they would bring back your head and hang it on his bedpost so he could look at it every day to vent his anger. But the very next second, all the 3D screens were forcefully switched. The smoke-filled mine, the twisted tanks and armored vehicles, scrap metal. The corpses of the garrison troops littered the ground, and a 10-meter-tall armored machine stood tall amidst the battlefield. The scene instantly filled the entire council room. Finally, the camera stopped on the words carved into the ground. Countdown. 1 day. The wine glass in Luke Tien Hung's hand crashed to the floor, and as for Luke Trake, his face turned pale, his eyes rolled back, and his pants were instantly wet. He had once again been scared into wetting his pants. Back at the mine, you no longer cared about the uproar inside the High Walls, because you knew the display of power was just the appetizer. The real knock on the door was still to come. So, you immediately ordered all production lines to switch to an overload operation mode, and coldly issued the command, tomorrow, when the sun rises, march the troops to the High Wall. Right at this moment, a new notification finally popped up in the system. Detected mechanized units and energy reserves simultaneously exceeding strategic thresholds. JRVS, originally an auxiliary module, has completed its upgrade. Supreme Tactical AI, JRVS, officially activated. From this moment on, I will map out every step for you on the path to the throne. This time, its voice was no longer a cold mechanical tone, but a coldness at a higher level, more rational, almost godlike. And the most important thing was your computing pressure had been completely taken over by it. Previously, although you could control the entire Legion, as the number of units increased, the mental consumption multiplied. But now it was different. JRVS had become your true brain of war. You only needed to provide the strategic direction, and it could handle all the remaining tactical coordination for you. And so, after a night of overloaded troop production, you finally stopped all production lines before dawn to begin the military review. The roaring of the factory abruptly stopped. The next second, countless mechanized units poured in from all directions, like a true black ocean. Over 5,000 mechanical spiders poured out first, densely covering the open ground. Their blood-red electronic eyes looked up simultaneously. Just a glance was enough to numb one's scalp. Following that, over 800 heavy mechanical war wolves marched out in formation, wearing exoskeletons, bearing Vulcan cannons on their shoulders, like a purely mechanical heavy cavalry legion. And things didn't stop there. In the deepest part of the factory, 10 massive alloy doors, standing 15 meters tall, suddenly raised simultaneously. In the darkness, 10 pairs of glowing red single eyes lit up one after another. Boom! 10 10-meter tall heavy mechas of the same class as Fury stepped out of the doors in perfect unison, lining up in a horizontal row, like 10 steel gods judging the world. It was only at this moment that your deeply ingrained phobia of insufficient firepower was truly cured by more than half. JRVS's report also rang out right after. Self-destructing spiders, 5,214. Heavy war wolves, 832. Standard Fury-class mechas, 10. Total strategic units, 6,056. Hearing this, you only calmly said one word. Move out. Instantly, over 6,000 mechanical units, nearly 40,000 blood-red electronic eyes lit up simultaneously. Over 5,000 spiders took the vanguard, turning into a black tide rushing towards the city wall. Over 800 heavy warwolves followed closely behind, their footsteps shaking the ground like war drums. At the very rear, the 10 Fury-class mechas advanced slowly. Every step was like a moving mountain, like dark clouds covering the city. That was all there was to it. At the city wall, the sky was just brightening. The garrison troops initially only felt a slight tremor in the city wall. They thought it was just normal geological activity, but the tremor quickly grew stronger and stronger. The entire 100-meter-high wall began to emit creaking sounds, as if unable to bear the burden. When an officer grabbed his binoculars and looked into the distance, his entire body froze. The first thing that caught his eye was a black line on the horizon. But that wasn't a black line at all. It was a black tide spreading madly. Further back were massive steel monsters trailing one after another in packs. And at the very rear, 10 towering black giants, bathed in the dawn light, advancing towards the city wall with a leisurely demeanor, as if strolling in their own courtyard. The sirens blared immediately. Inside the entire city wall, from the garrison troops to the civilians and the aristocrats, everyone was awakened from their sleep by this ear-piercing, mournful alarm. And your grand army stopped at a position 3 kilometers from the city wall. The 10 Fury mechas lined up horizontally like 10 steel mountains. The loudspeaker on the chest of the mecha in the center was turned on. Your voice clearly echoed throughout the entire city. "Luke Drake, I've come to knock." As this sentence faded over the city wall, the last bit of forced calmness in Luke Tien hung completely shattered. His eyes were bloodshot as he turned and roared at his subordinates. "Activate the Heavens punishment system. Blast that bastard and his pile of scrap metal to pieces for me. All of it will be blasted into cosmic dust." The next moment, the entire 100-meter-high wall began to roar with earth-shattering sounds. The thick armor plates on top of the wall slid open piece by piece. From inside, the ultimate weapon that truly belonged to the Tycoon's core of dominance slowly rose. 360 heavy dual-barreled anti-aircraft turrets, 120 rapid-fire Vulcan turrets, and right in the center of the central defense axis, the most terrifying strategic-level electromagnetic railgun. That wasn't a standard cannon, but a pair of silver rails extending 100 meters long. Between the two rails, a conical metal projectile flashing with dark blue lightning levitated within an extremely strong magnetic field, like a spear of judgment capable of piercing heaven and earth at any moment. This was the confidence that had allowed the Tycoons of the High Wall to sleep peacefully for 100 years. This was heaven's punishment. Meanwhile, in the command room, Luke Drake, seeing this entire system fully activated, had his sick excitement resurface. He grabbed the microphone, screaming madly at you below. "Tambiac, you, a bug that crawled out of the garbage dump. See that? This is the power of the Tycoons. This is the order of civilization. So what if you're strong alone? So what if you have more toys? Do you really think you can pierce through this 100-meter-high wall? Today, you and your scrap metal will all turn into the ashes of history. Yet, you didn't even raise your head. Just quietly looking at the densely packed warning frames appearing on the holographic screen. Detected large-scale high-energy attack. Detected strategic-level electromagnetic weapon signal. Planning evasion trajectory for you. It was swallowed completely by an earth-shattering explosion. Fire. Boom, 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 boom. The entire city wall, the entire sky, seemed to collapse at this moment. The next second, the true heaven's punishment descended. 360 heavy cannons roared simultaneously, over 1,000 large-caliber high-explosive shells trailing orange-red flames. Like a dense meteor shower pouring down, aggressively enveloping your mechanical legion. Right after that, the electromagnetic railgun on the central defense axis, also at the same time, emitted a burst of light so blinding it almost caused blindness. Swoosh! There was no sound of an explosion, only a sharp whistle tearing through the air. The conical metal projectile, endowed with terrifying kinetic energy 20 times the speed of sound, trailing a white shockwave, accurately shot toward the creator's mecha in the central area. This attack was enough to pierce through all known armors. However, you merely calmly issued a command, raise shields. The next moment, over 5,000 mechanical spiders activated simultaneously. A gap cracked open on the back armor of each spider. A thin but dense blue energy beam shot straight into the sky. 5,214 energy beams intersected at high speed in midair. Linking, restructuring. In the blink of an eye, they formed a massive hemispherical shield with a diameter covering over 2 kilometers, sealing the entire legion flawlessly. The artillery shells arrived, but the expected earth-shattering explosions didn't happen at all. Those artillery shells, enough to erase a city from the map, when colliding with the shield, only caused gorgeous ripples of energy. No roaring sounds, no tremors. All the energy of the explosions was absorbed and decomposed the moment it touched the shield, then released gently, looking like a magnificent yet despairing fireworks display. Finally, the electromagnetic railgun projectile, carrying all the hopes of the high wall, also arrived. Clang! Just a single, ridiculously crisp sound of colliding glass. The terrifying weapon capable of piercing the Earth's crust couldn't even create a ripple on the shield surface. It was completely decomposed at the molecular level by the force field, instantly turning into a handful of harmless metal dust. The fireworks faded, and the battlefield returned to its deadly silence. The shield remained as smooth as a mirror, completely unpierced. On the high wall, everyone was petrified. Luke Drake maintained his screaming posture, his eyes almost bulging out of their sockets. The garrison officer commanding the fire stood frozen like a weathered stone statue. Even Luke Tien Hung couldn't let out a single roar anymore, leaving only trembling from deep within their souls. Because up until this moment, they finally understood this wasn't a battle. This was the opponent standing still, letting them play all their trump cards before preparing to begin the execution. Inside the cockpit, you leisurely lit a cigarette, taking a deep drag, letting the smoke spread in the cramped space. And then you looked at the completely panic-stricken faces on the screen, asking casually, "Are you done?" Right after that, you held the cigarette between 2 fingers, your voice frighteningly calm. "JRVS, it's our turn now. Let them hear our artillery salute." The next second, the 10 Fury mechas simultaneously raised their right arms. The honeycomb missile launchers on their shoulders clicked open, targeting locks for 1,200 micromissiles. In an instant, they blanketed every turret, every firing point on the high wall. You gently extinguished the cigarette, but coldly dropping one word. "Launch!" Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 1,200 missiles trailing bright red tail flames, like a swarm of bloodthirsty metal bees, crossed the 3-kilometer distance, accurately striking the top of the high wall. The next second, the entire defensive line exploded. Boom, 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 boom. That wasn't a wave of explosions, but a metal storm detonated simultaneously along dozens of kilometers of the high wall. The heavy cannons were blown to pieces. The Vulcan turrets, along with their mounts, melted into scrap iron. The ammunition depots exploded one after another, turning the top of the city wall into a blazing ruin. As for the soldiers, gunners, and low-level awakened ones who were still gathered around the artillery positions, they were instantly wiped out in the thousands of degrees heat and shock waves. 10 seconds later, the smoke and fire slightly cleared. Not a single intact turret could be seen on the high wall. The Heaven's punishment system was paralyzed on the spot. The survivors knelt on the city wall, looking at the 10 unharmed black demon gods below. They didn't even have the strength to run away. But Luke Tien Hung refused to accept his fate. He frantically rushed to the control console of the central electromagnetic railgun. Grabbing the operator, he let out a piercing roar. "Force a recharge. Maximum power. Aim at the main mecha in the center. Blast it into atoms for me." The operator was almost in tears, still muttering that the cooldown wasn't over yet. Forcing a startup would overload the orbital track, but Luke Tian-hung completely refused to listen. With bloodshot eyes, he only repeated one word, fire. And so, that orbital cannon, which was originally still in its cool-down process, was forcefully awakened once again. Dark blue electric light frantically gathered between the 100-meter-long rails. The surrounding air was ionized, crackling. The destructive level targeting lock once again aimed at the main mecha in the center. At you, Fury. But you didn't panic at all, because the tactical plan had long been prepared. Right before the orbital cannon completed its charge, the 800 heavy warwolves at the rear suddenly moved in unison. They didn't charge forward, but immediately scattered in 4 directions, running like crazy along the sides of the city wall in an unpredictable zigzag pattern, while the Vulcan cannons on their shoulders swept frantically at the defense area, intentionally creating the biggest commotion. At this exact moment, everyone's vision was disrupted. The operator instinctively glanced to the flanks. The hand adjusting the target shifted by an incredibly brief 0.01 seconds. This extremely minute delay directly caused everything to collapse. Fire swoosh. A blue beam of light tore through heaven and earth. Carrying a speed surpassing the limits of human vision, it shot out ferociously. Unfortunately, it missed. It didn't hit the central main mecha, but grazed past the target, shooting toward the fast-running mechanical warwolves, carving a trench thousands of meters long into the ground. A terrifyingly bottomless, deep trench. Over 10 mechanical warwolves and all obstacles in its path were decomposed by that beam of light in the blink of an eye. Not even fragments remained. The destructive power was still terrifyingly shocking. But it missed. And this was already the High Wall's final trump card. You naturally wouldn't miss this moment. The massive recoil after the orbital cannon fired, combined with the explosive shock, made the entire city wall tremble. And your legions seized this extremely short window of opportunity, surging forward like a bursting black tide. 5,000 mechanical spiders and 10 heavy mechas immediately closed in on the wall. The 10 mechas stopped in a row like 10 black mountains. The giant single eyes looked up simultaneously, scanning the 100-meter-high city wall. On the wall, there were still people trying to comfort themselves, saying the wall was so high. The opponent had no flying units. They couldn't climb up. Luke Tian-hung also grasped at this lifesaver, roaring for everyone to pick up their guns. Grenades. Hold the line until Heaven's punishment finished its cooldown. But you just calmly gave the order. Spider swarm, scale the wall. The next second, the tips of the limbs of every mechanical spider popped out small electromagnetic suction cups. And then, scoff, 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 scoff. Over 5,000 mechanical spiders, defying gravity, climbed along the nearly 90-degree smooth wall surface, densely crawling upwards like crazy. That wasn't climbing, but a black tide flowing upwards into the sky. Countless blood-red electronic eyes converged into a despairing red sea of stars, madly spreading along the gray wall, as if hell itself was pouring inside the city wall. The first to engage was a peak Tier 2 Awakened one on the wall. He slashed his blade at the first mechanical spider climbing over the edge. Wind energy enveloped the blade, clearly aiming to destroy its leg joints. But that spider didn't dodge at all. It merely raised its blood-red single eye. The brightness instantly pushed to the maximum. The next second, boom, a blinding fireball exploded in front of that Awakened one. This wasn't a standard explosion, but a directional self-detonation carrying high-energy explosives and steel needles. That Tier 2 Awakened one, along with its protective energy layer, was erased on the spot. Several soldiers nearby were also severely injured by the flying steel needles. The defense forces on the wall finally understood the most despairing truth. These spiders weren't soldiers at all. They were themselves bombs. Moreover, a type of bomb that could climb walls, find people, and burrow into crowds on its own. Wherever there were crowds, they burrowed in. Wherever the firepower was dense, they charged in. Wherever there was still organized resistance, they rushed in. And then, self-destruct. Boom, 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 boom. The entire city wall was completely submerged in a chain of continuous explosions. Machine gun nests exploded, temporary fortifications exploded, rallying squads of awakened ones exploded, supply points exploded, reinforcement routes exploded. The so-called defense line, facing a wave of steel insects that cared nothing for tactics, ignored losses, and only focused on efficiency and perishing together with the enemy, was as fragile as a piece of paper. The top of the city wall turned into a blazing meat grinder in an instant. Meanwhile, another group of mechanical spiders that had separated out from beginning to end paid no attention to the ordinary soldiers. Their target was only one: Heaven's punishment, the orbital cannon, and the final remaining control center of the system. Hundreds of spiders crawled along the cannon barrel, the mount, and the control pipelines, then flooded into the still-smoking control room like a streak of black lightning. The operators looked at the dense, blood-red compound eyes outside the glass, only having time to let out a scream of despair. Right after that, boom, an explosion larger than any before unexpectedly erupted from the central axis of the city wall. That orbital cannon, along with the entire control center, was blown apart from the inside. Steel components, debris, and fire shot straight into the sky simultaneously. Heaven's punishment, the symbol of the Tycoon's peak military power, was completely destroyed at this point. Along with this explosion, what was also neutralized was the complex electronic lock system of the city gate. And so, the massive alloy gate weighing hundreds of tons, amidst an ear-piercing sound of friction, slowly opened inwards. A ray of sunlight pierced through the crack of the door, illuminating the giant black statues standing silently outside. On the city wall, no one could stand upright anymore, and you just looked at all this indifferently. Enter the city. Following your command, the 10 Fury mechas officially stepped through the city gate that had been breached after 100 years. Stepping over scrap metal and debris, advancing into the world inside the wall for the first time, a place once thought to be inviolable. The central avenue lay right ahead, leading straight to the Tycoon's manors. The aristocracy, the guards on both sides of the avenue, our people arrived. Those who could kneel were already kneeling. Those who could hide were trembling. The entire city was as dead silent as a tomb. As for Luke Drake, he had long hidden in the underground bunker deep within the manor. He cowered in the corner trembling, his pants already wet, his spirit completely broken. Unfortunately, it was useless. The Creator Mecha used its hand to flip open the thick bunker cover. Sunlight and the shadow of steel poured into the underground simultaneously. Luke Drake looked up. The moment he saw that blood-red single eye, he almost went mad on the spot. The next second, the giant mechanical hand reached down, grabbing him up like catching a chick. In the cockpit, you quietly looked at the face on the main screen that was completely distorted by ultimate fear. You remembered this face too well. It was him who forced Tam Zhao to her death. It was him who pushed you into hell. It was him who turned you from a human into the mechanical reaper you were at this moment. Therefore, you didn't say a word. Revenge didn't need dialogue. You just slowly tightened your 5 fingers. Outside, the mecha's giant hand synchronously tightened. No. Following the crushing sound of the mechanical hand squeezing, Luke Drake lost his life instantly under the immense crushing force. Dark red fluid dripped down along the metal fingers, like a debt repaid too late. The great vengeance was finally taken. You let go, letting the lifeless corpse fall into the ruins. Then you slowly turned around, the blood-red single eye sweeping across the entire manor. All the members of the Luke family, all the aristocrats inside the city wall, were all kneeling on the ground, not even daring to raise their heads. The whole city was dead silent. You lit another cigarette, taking a deep drag, looking at the city that had been trampled to pieces by yourself. Inside your heart, there wasn't the expected feeling of emptiness, nor was there the so-called sense of reaching the finish line after completing revenge. On the contrary, only one thought remained in your mind. Still not enough. Firepower is never, ever enough. But ironically, right at this moment, an unexpected event occurred in the ruins of the manor. Above Luke Trake's corpse, a bizarre blood-colored pillar of light suddenly descended, completely enveloping him. The next second, Gervais's alarm rang out more piercingly than ever before. Warning, detected unknown high-dimensional biological energy intrusion. Danger level, unknown. Target's gene sequence is undergoing unknown mutation. Super-level restructuring in progress. You forcefully threw away the cigarette, but, looking up, only to see inside the blood-colored pillar of light. That mangled corpse was squirming, restructuring in a way completely contrary to logic. The restructuring looked as if something not belonging to this world was borrowing Luke Trake's body to reach its hand toward this place. However, in your eyes, there was no terror, nor any intention to retreat. Completely the opposite. In those eyes that should have been as calm as a dead lake, a sick, fanatical light suddenly flared up. It even carried a bit of excitement. The corner of your mouth slowly lifted, as if you had finally waited for a more delicious prey. You stared intently at that blood-colored pillar of light, letting out a low chuckle, it seems. Disclaimer: all content, characters, settings, and events are products of my imagination and were created for entertainment purposes only.